Examining President Trump's executive orders on immigration, implications, comparisons, and projections. Welcome to the Bold African Voice, BAV, where bold ideas meet African perspectives. I'm Abdul Karim Kargbo, born and raised in Africa. Today, we're diving into President Trump's sweeping immigration policies. What do they mean for America? How do they compare to Africa's migration challenges? And most importantly, what lessons can leaders worldwide learn? Stay tuned for this critical analysis that bridges continents and drives meaningful change. Introduction. President Donald Trump's second term has reignited debates over immigration policies as he unveils a series of executive orders focused on border security, deportation, asylum restrictions, and an unprecedented move to end birthright citizenship. While these policies signal a continuation and intensification of his first-term agenda, their implications extend far beyond U.S. borders, affecting global migration trends, international relations, and the country's legal landscape. This video critically examines these policies, compares them to immigration practices across the globe, and explores their potential future impact. Border security and militarization. The declaration of a national emergency at the U.S.-Mexico border and the deployment of military forces marks a significant escalation in border militarization. By directing the Department of Defense and Homeland Security to complete the border wall and reinstating the controversial Remain in Mexico policy, the administration reinforces its narrative of border security as a national security priority. This strategy has drawn criticism from various quarters, including Mexico's Secretary of External Relations, Juan Ramón de la Fuente, who emphasized the need for cooperation over confrontation. Globally, border militarization is not unique to the U.S. Countries like Hungary and India have erected physical barriers to stem migration, often citing security concerns. However, such measures have been criticized for exacerbating humanitarian crises, as seen in the EU's handling of migrants along the Mediterranean route. Critical analysis. The reliance on military deployment at borders raises questions about the long-term viability of addressing migration through force. Historical precedents, such as the Berlin Wall or the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea, highlight the challenges of maintaining heavily fortified borders without addressing underlying causes of migration, such as violence, poverty, and climate change. Mass deportations, practical and humanitarian challenges. President Trump's plan for mass deportations targets 11 million undocumented immigrants, a figure that presents logistical and humanitarian challenges. While the administration promises expanded enforcement authority, experts like Stephen Yale Lower from Cornell Law School point out the impracticality of such measures given the backlog of over 3.8 million immigration court cases. This scenario mirrors challenges faced by the European Union, where countries like Italy and Greece struggle with processing asylum claims amid legal and bureaucratic delays. Global comparison. Australia's offshore detention system for asylum seekers offers a cautionary tale. Although effective in reducing unauthorized arrivals, it has faced international condemnation for human rights violations, including prolonged detention and poor living conditions. Similarly, the U.S. risks tarnishing its global reputation as a champion of human rights if it proceeds with indiscriminate deportations. Asylum restrictions and refugee program termination. The immediate deportation of migrants without asylum hearings and the termination of the refugee resettlement program represents a stark departure from the U.S.'s historic role as a sanctuary for the oppressed. These measures echo restrictive policies in countries like Denmark, which has adopted stringent asylum laws, including deporting asylum seekers to third countries like Rwanda. Forward-looking analysis. As global displacement reaches record highs, over 108 million people according to UNHCR, countries must reevaluate their approach to asylum. The U.S. risks isolating itself from its allies and eroding its moral authority by retreating from international humanitarian commitments. Future administrations may face mounting pressure to restore these programs, particularly as climate-induced migration intensifies. Birthright citizenship and constitutional challenges. Perhaps the most legally contentious of Trump's executive orders is the attempt to end birthright citizenship. Rooted in the 14th Amendment, this right has been a cornerstone of U.S. citizenship policy since 1868. Revoking it would likely face immediate judicial challenges, with opponents arguing that such an action undermines constitutional principles. Africa-wide comparison. The U.S. is not alone in grappling with birthright citizenship debates. South Africa, for example, allows children born to foreign nationals to acquire citizenship under specific conditions. However, restrictive interpretations in other African nations, such as Côte d'Ivoire, have led to statelessness among vulnerable groups. The U.S. must consider the long-term social and economic consequences of such policies, including the creation of a stateless population within its borders. Technological changes. The end of the CBP. One app. The termination of the CBP One app, which facilitated orderly migration through legal pathways, signals a shift away from technology-driven solutions toward more rigid enforcement mechanisms. This decision comes amid growing reliance on digital tools for migration management globally. Countries like Canada have pioneered systems that streamline asylum applications online, demonstrating that technology can enhance efficiency and transparency. Critical implications. By abandoning the CBP One app, the U.S. risks increasing irregular migration as legal pathways narrow. In the long term, reinstating and improving such tools could help balance enforcement with humanitarian obligations. Future implications for U.S. and global migration policy. President Trump's immigration policies have significant implications for the U.S.'s domestic and international standing. Critics argue these measures prioritize short-term political gains over sustainable solutions to migration challenges. Moving forward, global cooperation will be essential to address the root causes of migration, from economic disparity to political instability and climate change. Reactions from advocacy groups and civil society. The sweeping immigration policies outlined by President Trump's administration have elicited strong responses from advocacy groups, legal experts, and civil society organizations. The American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, and other immigrant rights groups have vowed to challenge these measures in court, citing potential violations of constitutional rights and international humanitarian obligations. Iral Kikich of Church World Service, a prominent refugee advocacy organization, expressed concerns over the broader societal impacts of ending the refugee resettlement program. He highlighted the cultural and economic contributions refugees make to U.S. communities, emphasizing that their exclusion would harm not only those seeking safety, but also the fabric of American society. Comparative context. Africa's role in migration diplomacy. Africa, a continent that has historically experienced significant migration flows both internally and externally, provides a unique lens to examine these U.S. policies. Countries like Uganda have embraced refugee populations, hosting over 1.5 million refugees and integrating them into local communities. This approach contrasts sharply with the restrictive measures in Trump's orders, raising questions about global responsibility sharing in addressing displacement crises. However, African governments are not without challenges. In South Africa, for example, xenophobic violence against migrants has highlighted the tensions that arise when host communities perceive economic or social strain. This underscores the need for comprehensive migration policies that balance national interests with human rights obligations, lessons the U.S. could draw upon to navigate its own migration dilemmas. Economic implications of Trump's immigration policies. Immigration has long been a driver of economic growth in the United States, with immigrants contributing to labor force expansion, innovation, and entrepreneurship. By targeting undocumented immigrants and restricting legal pathways, the administration risks creating labor shortages in key industries such as agriculture, construction, and healthcare. According to a 2023 report by the Migration Policy Institute, nearly 70% of undocumented immigrants in the U.S. are part of the workforce, with many employed in sectors heavily reliant on immigrant labor. The removal of such a substantial labor force could disrupt supply chains, drive up costs for consumers, and hinder economic recovery post-pandemic. Global perspective. Migrant contributions. Globally, the economic contributions of migrants have been well documented. In countries like Germany, which adopted an open-door policy during the 2015 refugee crisis, migrants have filled labor shortages and contributed to GDP growth. While integration challenges remain, the economic benefits have largely outweighed the costs, providing a compelling counter-argument to Trump's restrictive policies. Geopolitical ramifications. Trump's executive orders are likely to strain diplomatic relations with neighboring Mexico and Central American countries. The reinstatement of the Remain in Mexico policy, in particular, risks undermining bilateral cooperation on migration and trade. Mexico's Foreign Affairs Ministry has already signaled its opposition, setting the stage for potential diplomatic standoffs. On a broader scale, these policies may weaken the U.S.'s standing as a global leader in human rights and refugee resettlement. Countries like Canada and Germany, which have positioned themselves as champions of humanitarian migration, may fill the void left by the U.S., shifting the balance of moral leadership on the global stage. Forward-looking approaches, rethinking migration policy. The U.S. faces a pivotal moment in shaping its approach to migration. Instead of pursuing punitive measures, a forward-looking strategy could focus on addressing the root causes of migration. Investments in economic development, governance reforms, and climate resilience in source countries could significantly reduce the pressure on borders. Moreover, the U.S. could explore multilateral solutions, working with regional partners to develop shared frameworks for migration management. Lessons from the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration, a UN initiative, highlight the potential of cooperative strategies in addressing complex migration challenges. Technological innovations in migration management. As the world increasingly relies on technology to manage migration, the U.S.'s decision to end the CBP-1 app stands out as a step backward. Digital platforms have proven effective in other countries, such as Canada's Express Entry system, which streamlines immigration applications while maintaining transparency and fairness. The integration of technology into migration management could help the U.S. balance security concerns with humanitarian obligations. Enhanced biometric systems, AI-driven risk assessments, and mobile applications for asylum seekers could modernize the process, reducing reliance on outdated enforcement mechanisms. Legal challenges and constitutional debates. The legal challenges to President Trump's executive orders are already taking shape, with advocacy groups and legal experts pointing to potential violations of constitutional rights and international law. The attempt to revoke birthright citizenship, for instance, is expected to face immediate scrutiny in federal courts, as it directly contradicts the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Ratified in 1868, this amendment guarantees citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States. Experts argue that an executive order cannot unilaterally overturn a constitutional provision without congressional action or a constitutional amendment. Constitutional scholars like Erwin Chemerinsky have labeled the move a constitutional non-starter, asserting that the courts will almost certainly strike it down. Precedents in constitutional litigation. This is not the first time Trump's immigration policies have sparked constitutional debates. During his first term, the administration's travel ban targeting predominantly Muslim-majority countries was partially upheld by the Supreme Court in Trump v. Hawaii, 2018, but not without dissent from several justices who raised concerns over religious discrimination. The current orders may similarly face a mixed judicial reception, particularly as federal courts grapple with the balance between executive authority and constitutional safeguards. State-level responses and resistance. Beyond the courts, states and local governments are emerging as key actors in resisting federal immigration policies. Sanctuary cities, which limit cooperation with federal immigration enforcement, are likely to double down on their commitments in the face of expanded deportation efforts. California, New York, and Illinois, states with large immigrant populations, have already vowed to protect their residents through legal aid and community support programs. Global comparison, decentralized immigration policies. The interplay between federal and state governments in immigration enforcement mirrors dynamics in other countries with decentralized governance. In Germany, for example, states, Länder, have significant discretion over the implementation of national immigration policies. This has allowed for a more localized and tailored approach to migration, balancing national security concerns with regional priorities. In the U.S., this decentralized resistance could complicate the administration's enforcement efforts, further highlighting the challenges of imposing blanket immigration policies on a diverse and divided nation. Public opinion and political polarization. Public sentiment around immigration remains deeply polarized. A recent Pew Research Center survey found that while a majority of Americans support comprehensive immigration reform, significant divides exist along partisan lines. Republican voters overwhelmingly back stricter border controls and deportation policies, while Democrats emphasize the need for humane treatment and legal pathways for migrants. The role of media and advocacy campaigns. Media narratives and advocacy campaigns are likely to play a pivotal role in shaping public opinion. Organizations like the ACLU and Church World Service are already mobilizing resources to counter the administration's messaging, emphasizing the human stories behind the statistics. At the same time, conservative media outlets are amplifying the administration's framing of immigration as a national security crisis, reinforcing partisan divides. Economic costs of restrictive policies. The economic implications of Trump's immigration policies extend beyond labor shortages to include increased enforcement costs. Deploying the military to the border, expanding detention facilities, and conducting mass deportations will require substantial federal funding. Critics argue that these resources could be better allocated toward modernizing immigration infrastructure and supporting integration programs. Case study: Canada's immigration model. Canada's points-based immigration system offers a stark contrast to the U.S. approach. By prioritizing skilled labor and creating pathways for family reunification, Canada has successfully leveraged immigration as a tool for economic growth. The U.S. could benefit from adopting similar strategies, particularly as it faces an aging workforce and declining birth rates. The ripple effect. Regional and international dynamics. Trump's immigration orders are likely to have ripple effects across the Western Hemisphere. Central American countries, already grappling with economic instability and violence, may face increased pressure as U.S. policies deter migrants from seeking refuge. Mexico, a key transit country, could see a surge in stranded asylum seekers, further straining its resources. International cooperation or isolation. The U.S.'s retreat from its humanitarian commitments could weaken its alliances with countries that have historically relied on its support for refugee resettlement. This isolationist stance contrasts with global initiatives like the UNHCR's Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework, which emphasizes shared responsibility in addressing displacement crises. Future directions. What lies ahead? As legal battles unfold and public debates intensify, the future of U.S. immigration policy remains uncertain. The outcomes of these policies will not only shape the lives of millions of migrants, but also redefine America's identity as a nation of immigrants. Grassroots movements, mobilizing for change amid the sweeping changes in U.S. immigration policy. Grassroots movements have emerged as powerful counterforces, advocating for immigrant rights and providing direct support to affected communities. Organizations such as United We Dream and the National Immigration Law Center are intensifying their efforts to challenge restrictive measures through litigation, lobbying, and public awareness campaigns. In addition to advocacy, these groups are offering critical resources to undocumented individuals, including legal aid, housing support, and education on rights during immigration enforcement actions. Their role in mobilizing communities underscores the resilience of civil society in the face of systemic challenges. Comparative insights. Grassroots activism in Africa and Europe. The U.S. is not alone in witnessing grassroots responses to restrictive immigration policies. In Africa, local communities and organizations have often stepped in to assist migrants and refugees when governments fail to provide adequate support. For instance, in Uganda, grassroots networks have facilitated the integration of refugees into local economies, demonstrating the potential for community-driven solutions. Similarly, in Europe, organizations like Sea-Watch and SOS Méditerranée have carried out life-saving missions in the Mediterranean, filling gaps left by government inaction. These examples highlight the importance of grassroots efforts in addressing humanitarian crises and advocating for systemic change. Technology and innovation in migration management. While the Trump administration has moved away from using tools like the CBP One app, other nations are leveraging technology to streamline immigration processes. Digital innovations, such as mobile applications for asylum claims, biometric identification systems, and AI-driven risk assessments, are transforming how governments manage migration. Case study: Kenya's Huduma Namba. Kenya's Huduma Namba program, which integrates biometric data into a single identification system, has been lauded for improving access to services for both citizens and refugees. By simplifying bureaucratic processes and enhancing data accuracy, Such systems offer a template for modernizing migration management. The U.S. could adopt similar approaches to address inefficiencies in its immigration system. For example, reintroducing and enhancing digital tools like the CBP One app could help reduce court backlogs and improve transparency in asylum processing. Implications for the 2028 presidential race. Immigration is poised to remain a central issue in the lead-up to the 2028 presidential election. President Trump's policies, while polarizing, have energized his political base and reshaped the Republican Party's platform. On the Democratic side, candidates are likely to campaign on restoring humane immigration practices, emphasizing inclusivity and global leadership. Global reflection, electoral impacts of immigration policy. Globally, immigration has proven to be a decisive electoral issue. In Europe, far-right parties have gained traction by capitalizing on public fears over migration, as seen in Italy and Hungary. Conversely, leaders like Canada's Justin Trudeau have championed pro-immigration policies, framing them as integral to national prosperity. The U.S. electoral landscape mirrors these dynamics, with immigration policy serving as both a rallying cry and a litmus test for broader political values. The outcome of these debates will shape not only the nation's immigration framework but also its identity on the world stage. The human cost, stories behind the policies. Amid discussions of enforcement and policy, it is crucial to center the human stories that underscore the stakes of these decisions. Migrants fleeing violence, poverty, and climate change often endure harrowing journeys in search of safety and opportunity. For many, the prospect of deportation or indefinite detention represents a devastating setback to their aspirations. Highlighting human resilience, grassroots campaigns and media outlets have increasingly sought to amplify these narratives, shifting public perceptions and fostering empathy. Documentaries, social media campaigns, and storytelling initiatives have proven effective in humanizing the immigration debate, challenging the dehumanization often inherent in political rhetoric. The geopolitical ripple effects of U.S. immigration policies. President Trump's aggressive immigration measures are already sending ripples across the geopolitical landscape, with allies and neighbors recalibrating their strategies to respond to shifting U.S. priorities. Mexico, in particular, has expressed strong opposition to policies such as the reinstatement of Remain in Mexico, signaling a potential strain on bilateral relations. Regional cooperation or confrontation. Central American countries, including Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, find themselves in a precarious position. These nations rely heavily on remittances from migrants in the U.S., which constitute a significant portion of their GDP. Mass deportations could destabilize these economies, exacerbate poverty, and increase pressure for migration. The Trump administration's reduction of aid to these countries, aimed at pressuring them to curb migration, further complicates the situation. In contrast, countries in the European Union have adopted varying approaches to address the challenges of migration and asylum. While nations like Germany have embraced a cooperative framework, others, such as Poland and Hungary, have enacted restrictive policies. The U.S. could benefit from studying both models to identify pathways for managing migration in a manner that balances national security with humanitarian obligations. The role of international institutions. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, and other international bodies have voiced concern over the U.S.'s retreat from its long-standing role in global refugee resettlement. The cessation of the refugee program marks a significant departure from a legacy that has positioned the U.S. as a leader in offering sanctuary to displaced populations. Lessons from global initiatives programs like the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework, CRRF, initiated under the Global Compact on Refugees, offer valuable insights into multilateral approaches to displacement. By fostering international collaboration, these frameworks emphasize burden sharing and sustainable solutions. The U.S.'s withdrawal from these commitments could undermine global efforts to address the rising tide of forced displacement, which the UNHCR estimates affects over 108 million people worldwide. Climate migration, the overlooked crisis. While current policies focus heavily on enforcement, they fail to address an emerging driver of migration, climate change. Rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and desertification are forcing millions to flee their homes, particularly in vulnerable regions such as Central America and Sub-Saharan Africa. Proactive policy solutions. Countries like New Zealand have introduced visa pathways specifically for climate-displaced individuals, recognizing the need for innovative approaches to this growing crisis. The U.S., as a global leader, can pioneer similar initiatives, integrating climate resilience into its broader migration strategy. Innovations in border management. Modernizing border security is a critical challenge for any nation grappling with migration. While physical barriers have been a hallmark of Trump's policies, advancements in technology offer alternative solutions that prioritize efficiency and human rights. Technology in practice. Israel and the EU. Israel's use of drones and surveillance technologies at its borders provides an example of how technology can enhance security without reliance on physical walls. Similarly, the European Union has invested in Frontex, its border and coast guard agency, to deploy cutting-edge tools for monitoring migration flows. The U.S. could adopt a hybrid model that combines technological innovation with traditional enforcement mechanisms, ensuring a secure yet humane approach to border management. Public health considerations. The intersection of immigration and public health is another dimension that demands attention. Detention facilities, often overcrowded and under-resourced, pose significant risks for the spread of infectious diseases. During the COVID-19 pandemic, these facilities became hotspots for outbreaks, drawing criticism from public health advocates. Global health partnerships, collaborating with international health organizations such as the World Health Organization, WHO, could help the U.S. address these challenges. By investing in healthcare infrastructure at detention centers and along migration routes, the U.S. can safeguard both migrant populations and public health at large. Looking ahead, policy recommendations. As the Biden administration's policies are dismantled and Trump's second-term agenda unfolds, the U.S. faces critical choices in shaping its immigration future. Policy recommendations include 1. Reviving legal pathways, expanding visa programs, and reinstating the CBP-1 app to provide orderly migration channels. 2. Addressing root causes, investing in development aid and climate resilience in source countries to reduce migration pressures. 3. Balancing security and humanity, adopting technology-driven border management while upholding international human rights standards. 4. Fostering global cooperation, re-engaging with international bodies to share responsibility for displaced populations. Sociocultural impacts of Trump's immigration policies. The ripple effects of President Trump's immigration policies extend deeply into the fabric of American society, reshaping community dynamics, cultural integration, and perceptions of national identity. By targeting undocumented immigrants, restricting asylum, and curtailing refugee programs, these measures have amplified divisions and fueled debates over the cultural and economic contributions of immigrants to the United States. Community fractures and polarization. Immigration enforcement has long been a flashpoint for community tensions. In regions with high concentrations of immigrants, increased enforcement actions, such as workplace raids and deportations, have created climates of fear and mistrust. Families are often torn apart, leaving lasting emotional scars on children and communities. Cities that have declared themselves as sanctuaries for immigrants have become battlegrounds between local authorities and federal agencies. For instance, cities like San Francisco and Chicago have resisted cooperation with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, emphasizing their commitment to protecting undocumented residents. This tension highlights a growing divide between local and federal approaches to immigration, cultural integration, and contributions. Despite restrictive policies, immigrants have historically played a vital role in shaping American culture and society. From cuisine to music, literature to innovation, the contributions of immigrant communities are woven into the nation's identity. The current administration's rhetoric and policies risk undermining this legacy, fostering an exclusionary narrative that could alienate immigrant populations and diminish cultural exchange. Economic consequences for immigrant-dependent industries. The economic fallout of Trump's policies is particularly evident in sectors that rely heavily on immigrant labor, such as agriculture, construction, hospitality, and healthcare. These industries often employ undocumented workers to fill labor shortages, performing jobs that many native-born citizens are unwilling to take. Agricultural sector struggles. The agricultural industry, which depends on immigrant labor for harvesting crops, faces significant challenges under the threat of mass deportations. A 2024 report by the American Farm Bureau Federation warned that a lack of immigrant workers could lead to higher production costs, reduced crop yields, and increased reliance on imported goods. Healthcare workforce gaps. Similarly, the healthcare sector, already strained by an aging population and a shortage of skilled workers, stands to lose valuable personnel if immigrant workers are targeted. Undocumented individuals and those on temporary visas often fill critical roles, particularly in elder care and rural healthcare settings. Reducing this workforce could exacerbate disparities in healthcare access. International perceptions of U.S. leadership. Trump's immigration policies are reshaping how the United States is viewed on the global stage. Once regarded as a beacon of opportunity and refuge, the U.S. is increasingly seen as turning inward, prioritizing enforcement over humanitarian values. A shift from multilateralism. By withdrawing from international agreements and scaling back refugee programs, the U.S. risks ceding its role as a leader in global migration governance. Countries like Canada and Germany, which continue to champion inclusive migration policies, are stepping into the void, strengthening their influence in global forums. The role of soft power immigration has long been a cornerstone of U.S. soft power, attracting talent and fostering goodwill around the world. Policies that restrict immigration could weaken this advantage, limiting the country's ability to compete in an increasingly interconnected global economy. Global migration trends. Learning from Africa and Europe. The restrictive measures implemented by the Trump administration reflect broader trends in migration policy globally. African and European countries, faced with their own migration challenges, offer valuable lessons for navigating these complexities. The African migration experience in Africa. Migration is often driven by economic opportunities, political instability, and environmental factors. Countries like Uganda and Ethiopia, which host large refugee populations, have demonstrated the importance of regional cooperation and community integration in managing migration flows. Europe's asylum debates. In Europe, the rise of far-right political movements has sparked heated debates over asylum policies and border security. While countries like Sweden and Germany have maintained relatively open policies, others like Hungary and Italy have adopted hardline stances. These differing approaches highlight the tension between national sovereignty and international obligations. The road ahead, balancing priorities. As the United States navigates its evolving immigration landscape, finding a balance between security, economic needs, and humanitarian commitments will be critical. The following strategies could help chart a more sustainable path. 1. Reform immigration courts, reducing backlogs and increasing resources for immigration courts to expedite case processing. 2. Expand legal pathways, creating new visa categories for essential workers and climate-displaced individuals. 3. Invest in regional solutions, collaborating with source and transit countries to address root causes of migration. 4. Foster public dialogue, engaging communities in constructive conversations about immigration to counter polarization. The intersection of immigration policy and technology. As immigration policy evolves, the role of technology in managing migration is becoming increasingly significant. While the Trump administration has scaled back the use of tools like the CBP One app, global trends indicate that technology offers immense potential to modernize immigration enforcement and streamline processes. Balancing efficiency with ethical considerations, however, remains a critical challenge. Advances in biometric and digital identification. Countries such as India and Kenya have pioneered biometric identification systems that enhance the accuracy of personal data while reducing fraud. India's Aadhaar system, a biometric ID platform covering over 1 billion citizens and residents, has been used to facilitate access to services, including for migrants. Similarly, Kenya's Huduma Namba program integrates biometric data for both citizens and non-citizens, improving administrative efficiency. The U.S. could adapt such models to modernize its immigration infrastructure. By incorporating biometrics into visa and asylum processes, the government could enhance security while ensuring fair treatment. However, privacy concerns and the potential for misuse of data must be addressed to maintain public trust. AI and predictive analytics in migration management. Artificial intelligence, AI, and predictive analytics are transforming how governments manage migration. AI-driven tools can forecast migration trends, optimize resource allocation at borders, and flag potential risks. For instance, the European Union uses predictive models to anticipate asylum applications and border crossings, allowing for proactive responses. Incorporating similar technologies into U.S. immigration policy could improve efficiency, reduce backlogs, and minimize errors. However, transparency and accountability must underpin these systems to prevent discrimination or bias, especially against vulnerable populations. Political implications and the 2028 presidential race. Immigration policies have always been a litmus test for presidential administrations, shaping political narratives and voter perceptions. Trump's executive orders are no exception, galvanizing his base while intensifying opposition from civil rights groups, immigrant communities, and progressive policymakers. The Republican strategy, doubling down on enforcement. Trump's approach reflects a broader Republican strategy of emphasizing border security and enforcement. This rhetoric resonates with conservative voters who prioritize sovereignty and national security. The party is likely to continue leveraging these policies as a rallying point in the 2028 presidential race. The Democratic counter-narrative. On the Democratic side, candidates are expected to campaign on restoring humane and inclusive immigration practices. Proposals such as expanding pathways to citizenship, reinstating refugee programs, and addressing the root causes of migration will likely form the cornerstone of their platform. The party will aim to counter Trump's policies by highlighting the economic and cultural contributions of immigrants. Impact on swing states' immigration policy could prove decisive in swing states with significant immigrant populations, such as Arizona, Florida, and Nevada. The political calculus in these regions underscores the need for a nuanced approach that addresses both security concerns and the benefits of immigration, human rights advocacy, and international law. The rollback of asylum protections and refugee resettlement programs has drawn sharp criticism from international human rights organizations. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, has reiterated that asylum is a fundamental human right under the 1951 Refugee Convention, to which the U.S. is a signatory. Legal challenges and global accountability. The administration's policies may face scrutiny in international forums, with advocacy groups invoking global human rights standards. Legal experts have pointed out that certain measures, such as immediate deportations without due process, could contravene international law. These challenges highlight the tension between domestic policy priorities and global responsibilities. Addressing root causes, a global imperative. While the Trump administration focuses on enforcement, the root causes of migration remain largely unaddressed. Poverty, violence, political instability, and climate change continue to drive displacement, particularly in Central America and Sub-Saharan Africa. International cooperation on development multilateral initiatives such as the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, offer a roadmap for addressing these root causes. The U.S. could play a leadership role by increasing foreign aid, supporting governance reforms, and investing in climate resilience in source countries. Such efforts would reduce migration pressures and demonstrate a commitment to shared global challenges. The road ahead. Policy recommendations for a balanced approach. To navigate the complexities of modern migration, the U.S. must adopt policies that balance security, economic needs, and humanitarian obligations. Key recommendations include 1. Investing in technology, modernizing immigration systems through AI, biometrics, and digital platforms to enhance efficiency and fairness. 2. Strengthening international partnerships, collaborating with allies and international organizations to address displacement and support refugee resettlement. 3. Expanding legal pathways, creating additional visa categories for essential workers, climate migrants, and asylum seekers. 4. Engaging in public education, countering misinformation about immigration through transparent communication and public dialogue. 5. Addressing structural inequities, tackling systemic barriers that disproportionately affect marginalized immigrant communities. The role of civil society in shaping immigration policy. Civil society has become a cornerstone in the battle over U.S. immigration policy, serving as both a watchdog and a safety net for immigrant communities. Grassroots organizations, advocacy groups, and faith-based coalitions are mobilizing resources to counter restrictive measures and support those affected. Grassroots mobilization and advocacy organizations like United We Dream, and the National Immigration Law Center have intensified their efforts to challenge Trump's policies through litigation, public awareness campaigns, and direct action. These groups provide critical resources such as legal aid, know your rights education, and emergency housing for individuals targeted by deportation efforts. Faith-based initiatives, religious organizations, historically at the forefront of humanitarian work, have expanded their roles in the immigration crisis. Churches, synagogues, and mosques across the country have offered sanctuary to undocumented individuals and families, defying federal policies. Faith-based coalitions argue that their actions align with moral and ethical principles, emphasizing the human dignity of migrants. Public sentiment and the power of storytelling. Public opinion is shaped significantly by narratives that humanize migrants. Documentaries, social media campaigns, and individual testimonials have become powerful tools in shifting perceptions. Stories of families separated at the border, children in detention centers, and individuals fleeing persecution resonate with broader audiences, challenging the dehumanizing rhetoric often associated with enforcement policies. Media narratives and their influence on immigration debates. The media plays a dual role in framing immigration as both a crisis and a humanitarian issue. While some outlets amplify fears about border security and economic competition, others highlight the resilience and contributions of immigrant communities. Polarization in media coverage. Conservative outlets, such as Fox News, often emphasize narratives of crime and economic strain associated with undocumented migration. Conversely, progressive platforms like MSNBC focus on the human rights implications of enforcement actions and the benefits of inclusive policies. This polarization contributes to a divided public discourse, complicating efforts to find bipartisan solutions. The role of social media has emerged as a battleground for competing narratives. Advocacy groups use platforms like Twitter and Instagram to mobilize supporters and share real-time updates on enforcement actions, while opponents of immigration reform deploy the same tools to amplify their perspectives. The result is a fragmented digital landscape that mirrors broader societal divisions. U.S. competitiveness in a globalized world. Immigration policies do more than affect domestic populations. They shape the United States' ability to compete on the global stage. Restrictive measures that limit the flow of talent, innovation, and diversity risk undermining the nation's economic and cultural vitality. Talent and innovation. The U.S. has long benefited from its ability to attract top talent from around the world. Immigrants have been instrumental in founding major companies, driving technological advancements, and contributing to academic research. Policies that restrict legal pathways for high-skilled workers could push talent to other countries, such as Canada or Germany, which actively court immigrants to fill gaps in their labor markets. Cultural diplomacy. Immigration is also a critical component of cultural diplomacy. Welcoming immigrants and refugees bolster the U.S.'s reputation as a land of opportunity and freedom. This soft power has historically strengthened alliances, fostered goodwill, and attracted investment. A retreat from these principles risks diminishing the U.S.'s influence in international affairs. Comparative global approaches to immigration. Examining how other nations manage migration offers valuable insights for the U.S. While Trump's policies focus on enforcement and restriction, other countries have adopted more nuanced approaches. Canada's points-based system. Canada's immigration system prioritizes economic needs by selecting migrants based on skills, education, and language proficiency. This model has not only fueled economic growth but also garnered widespread public support. The U.S. could explore adapting elements of this approach to address labor shortages and demographic challenges. Germany's refugee integration. Germany's decision to accept over 1 million refugees during the 2015 migration crisis highlighted the potential for inclusive policies. While integration has posed challenges, the long-term economic and cultural benefits have been significant. This experience underscores the importance of investing in social infrastructure to support newcomers. Future scenarios for U.S. immigration policy. The trajectory of U.S. immigration policy will depend on several factors, including political leadership, public opinion, and global trends. 3 possible scenarios could emerge. 1. Continued restriction. If Trump's policies gain traction, the U.S. may adopt increasingly restrictive measures, with a focus on enforcement and deportation. 2. Incremental reform. A bipartisan compromise could lead to modest reforms, balancing security concerns with expanded legal pathways for migration. 3. Progressive transformation. A future administration could overhaul the system, emphasizing humanitarian commitments, technological innovation, and global cooperation. The economic implications of immigration policy scenarios. The economic effects of U.S. immigration policies are profound, influencing labor markets, innovation, and public finances. Each potential policy trajectory, restriction, reform, or transformation carries distinct implications for the economy and society at large. 1. Continued restriction, shortages, and stagnation. Under a restrictive regime, industries heavily reliant on immigrant labor such as agriculture, construction, and hospitality could face severe workforce shortages. The American Farm Bureau Federation has warned that without migrant labor, domestic food production could decline, leading to increased reliance on imports and higher consumer prices. Moreover, restrictive policies could stifle innovation. According to the National Foundation for American Policy, immigrants founded 55% of U.S. startups valued at over $1 billion. Limiting the inflow of skilled workers would reduce the nation's competitive edge in technology and science, as talent is redirected to countries with more welcoming policies. 2. Incremental reform, balancing security and growth. An incremental approach, balancing enhanced border security with expanded legal pathways, could stabilize labor markets while addressing public concerns over unauthorized immigration. Programs like temporary worker visas for sectors with critical shortages could fill immediate gaps, while expanded pathways to citizenship for undocumented immigrants could boost tax revenues and consumer spending. Studies have shown that comprehensive immigration reform, including legalization pathways, could add billions of dollars to the U.S. economy annually. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that such reforms could reduce the federal deficit by $197 billion over 20 years, underscoring the fiscal benefits of a balanced approach. 3. Progressive transformation, unlocking full potential. A transformative immigration policy that emphasizes inclusivity, innovation, and international collaboration could position the U.S. as a global leader in migration governance, expanding visa programs for high-skilled workers, creating new categories for climate migrants, and investing in integration initiatives would yield long-term economic and social dividends. For instance, the International Monetary Fund has highlighted the positive correlation between immigration and GDP growth in advanced economies. By tapping into the potential of migrants as entrepreneurs, consumers, and taxpayers, the U.S. could harness immigration as a driver of sustained economic prosperity. The role of international law in shaping U.S. policies. U.S. immigration policy does not exist in a vacuum. It is shaped by international norms and agreements. Treaties such as the 1951 Refugee Convention and the Global Compact on Migration establish principles for the protection of migrants and asylum seekers, which the U.S. has historically upheld. However, recent policies have tested the nation's commitment to these frameworks. Accountability under international law. The administration's restrictive measures, such as immediate deportations without due process, have drawn criticism from international human rights organizations. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, has urged the U.S. to reconsider policies that undermine the right to seek asylum, a cornerstone of international refugee protection. In addition, the U.S.'s retreat from multilateral agreements risks isolating the nation from its allies. Re-engaging with global migration initiatives could restore credibility and strengthen partnerships on shared challenges, such as climate-induced displacement and irregular migration flows. Voices from migrant communities central to the immigration debate are the lived experiences of migrants themselves. Their stories provide invaluable insights into the human impact of policy decisions and the resilience of communities navigating an increasingly hostile environment. The resilience of Dreamers recipients of Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, commonly known as Dreamers, exemplify the contributions of undocumented immigrants. Many Dreamers have pursued higher education, launched businesses, and contributed to their communities despite the uncertainty surrounding their legal status. Their stories highlight the importance of providing stability and pathways to citizenship for individuals who have grown up in the U.S. challenges at the border. At the southern border, asylum seekers often face treacherous conditions and prolonged waits, due to policy backlogs and enforcement measures. Grassroots organizations have documented cases of families separated by detention policies and individuals stranded in border towns under the Remain in Mexico program. These experiences underscore the urgency of reforming border management systems to prioritize safety and dignity. Climate change and migration, an urgent nexus. As climate change accelerates, its impact on migration patterns is becoming increasingly evident. Rising sea levels, desertification, and extreme weather events are displacing millions, particularly in vulnerable regions such as Central America, South Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. The U.S.'s role in climate-induced displacement. The U.S., as a major contributor to global carbon emissions, bears a moral responsibility to address climate-induced migration, creating visa pathways for climate migrants and investing in resilience-building projects in affected regions could mitigate displacement pressures while reinforcing the nation's commitment to global leadership. Lessons from the Pacific. Small island nations in the Pacific, such as Kiribati and Tuvalu, are at the forefront of climate migration. These countries have called for international action to address the loss of habitable land and livelihoods. The U.S. could collaborate with these nations to develop innovative solutions, including resettlement programs and adaptation funding. Ethical considerations in immigration policy. Beyond economic and strategic factors, immigration policy is fundamentally a question of ethics. How a nation treats its most vulnerable reflects its values and priorities. Policies that uphold human dignity, fairness, and justice are not only morally sound, but also foster social cohesion and international respect. Education, healthcare, and social services. The intersection with immigration. The integration of immigrants into U.S. society depends heavily on access to education, healthcare, and social services. These sectors not only play a pivotal role in ensuring equitable opportunities for immigrants, but also serve as critical indicators of a nation's commitment to inclusivity and social cohesion. Education, a gateway to opportunity. Education is one of the most effective tools for fostering integration and upward mobility among immigrants. Public schools across the United States educate millions of children from immigrant families, including undocumented students protected under the Supreme Court ruling in Plyler v. Doe, 1982, which guarantees access to public education regardless of immigration status. Challenges and opportunities. However, immigrant students often face significant challenges, including language barriers, lack of resources, and discriminatory policies. English as a second language (ESL) programs, while widely available, are often underfunded and insufficient to meet the needs of diverse student populations. Promising practices such as dual language immersion programs and culturally responsive teaching have shown success in improving outcomes for immigrant students. States like California and New York have pioneered such initiatives, demonstrating that targeted investments in education can yield significant benefits for both students and communities. Global comparison. Refugee education. Globally, countries like Germany have implemented innovative approaches to refugee education. In response to the 2015 migration crisis, Germany integrated refugee children into mainstream schools while providing intensive language and cultural orientation classes. These efforts underscore the importance of education as a tool for social integration. Healthcare. Bridging gaps in access to healthcare is another critical component of immigrant integration. While programs like Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act, ACA, have expanded coverage, undocumented immigrants remain excluded from most federal benefits, leaving millions without access to affordable care. Community-based solutions. In the absence of federal support, local governments and nonprofits have stepped in to fill the gaps. Community health clinics, often funded by state or philanthropic initiatives, provide essential services to immigrant populations, including preventive care, maternal health, and mental health support. Expanding programs like these, alongside efforts to include immigrants in broader healthcare reforms, could significantly improve health outcomes while reducing the long-term costs associated with untreated conditions. Learning from global systems. Countries like Canada and the United Kingdom, with universal healthcare systems, provide valuable insights into ensuring equitable access for immigrant populations. While challenges remain, these models illustrate the potential for inclusive healthcare policies to strengthen social cohesion and public health outcomes. Social services. Building resilience. Social services, including housing assistance, job training, and child care, play a crucial role in helping immigrants achieve economic stability and self-sufficiency. However, restrictive eligibility requirements often exclude undocumented individuals, exacerbating inequalities and limiting their contributions to the economy. Innovative approaches to inclusion. Cities like San Francisco and Chicago have implemented sanctuary policies that extend social services to all residents, regardless of immigration status. These programs demonstrate that inclusive policies can foster stronger, more resilient communities by addressing the root causes of inequality. Global inspiration. Scandinavian models. Scandinavian countries, known for their robust social welfare systems, provide universal access to services that prioritize equity and social integration. These models highlight the importance of investing in comprehensive support systems to address the complex needs of immigrant populations. State and local governments, leading the way. As federal immigration policy becomes increasingly restrictive, state and local governments are emerging as critical actors in shaping the immigrant experience. Progressive states like California and New York have adopted policies that protect immigrant rights and expand access to services, often in direct opposition to federal mandates. Sanctuary cities and states, sanctuary jurisdictions which limit cooperation with federal immigration enforcement, are at the forefront of this resistance. By prioritizing the safety and well-being of their residents, these cities and states offer a blueprint for how localized efforts can counterbalance restrictive national policies. The importance of local innovation. Local governments are also experimenting with innovative integration programs, such as workforce development initiatives and community-based partnerships. These efforts not only enhance the quality of life for immigrants, but also contribute to economic growth and cultural enrichment. Cross-sector partnerships, a holistic approach. Addressing the multifaceted challenges of immigration requires collaboration across sectors, including government, civil society, and the private sector. Cross-sector partnerships can leverage resources, expertise, and networks to create more comprehensive solutions. Corporate engagement. Private companies, particularly those in industries reliant on immigrant labor, have an important role to play in advocating for fair immigration policies and supporting integration efforts. From offering job training programs to funding community initiatives, corporate engagement can drive meaningful change. Nonprofit and philanthropic contributions. Nonprofits and philanthropic organizations are equally critical, providing direct services and advocating for systemic reforms. Groups like the Migration Policy Institute and the International Rescue Committee have been instrumental in shaping policy debates and supporting immigrant communities. Political, cultural, and ethical dimensions of immigration policy. Immigration policy is not solely a matter of logistics or economics. It is deeply intertwined with political ideologies, cultural narratives, and ethical considerations. The way a nation addresses immigration reflects its core values, its historical identity, and its vision for the future. These dimensions shape public opinion and influence the policymaking process, often in ways that extend far beyond immigration itself. The role of political ideology. Immigration has become a polarizing political issue in the United States, with competing narratives driving partisan divisions. For conservatives, the debate often centers on border security, sovereignty, and economic self-reliance. For progressives, the focus shifts to human rights, inclusivity, and the moral obligation to protect vulnerable populations. Populism and the politics of fear. Globally, the rise of populism has amplified anti-immigrant rhetoric, with political leaders leveraging fears of cultural dilution and economic competition to galvanize support. In the U.S., Trump's policies reflect this trend, framing immigration as a crisis that threatens national security and economic stability. Bipartisan challenges. While Republicans and Democrats have starkly different visions for immigration, bipartisan gridlock has stalled comprehensive reform efforts for decades. The inability to find common ground has left millions of immigrants in legal limbo, underscoring the need for pragmatic solutions that transcend partisan divides. Cultural narratives. Who gets to belong? The question of belonging is central to immigration debates, touching on issues of identity, diversity, and social cohesion. Immigrants have historically been both celebrated as contributors to American society and scapegoated during periods of economic or social upheaval. The melting pot myth. The United States has long prided itself on being a nation of immigrants, but this narrative often excludes the complexities of assimilation and cultural preservation. While some immigrant communities have successfully integrated into the melting pot, others have faced systemic barriers to acceptance, from discriminatory laws to xenophobic violence. Representation in media and cultural representation play a significant role in shaping public perceptions of immigrants. Positive portrayals of immigrants as hardworking and family-oriented can counteract negative stereotypes, while sensationalist depictions of crime and border crises fuel fear and prejudice. Ethical considerations. Balancing rights and responsibilities ethics form the backbone of any discussion on immigration, raising questions about justice, fairness, and humanity. Policymakers must navigate the tension between a nation's right to control its borders and its moral responsibility to protect those fleeing persecution, violence, or poverty. The plight of asylum seekers. The ethical implications of denying asylum to vulnerable populations are profound. Many asylum seekers endure life-threatening journeys to escape dire circumstances, only to face detention, deportation, or family separation upon arrival. Ensuring due process and humane treatment is not only a legal obligation under international law, but also a moral imperative. Intergenerational equity immigration policies also carry implications for future generations. Restrictive measures that limit opportunities for immigrants can perpetuate cycles of inequality and undermine social cohesion. Conversely, inclusive policies that invest in education, healthcare, and economic integration can lay the groundwork for a more equitable and prosperous society. Historical precedents. Informing modern policy history offers valuable lessons for understanding the current immigration landscape. The U.S. has a long and complex history of immigration, marked by periods of openness and exclusion. Past patterns of exclusion. From the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 to the restrictive quotas of the 1924 Immigration Act, past policies have often reflected racial and ethnic biases. These historical injustices serve as cautionary tales, highlighting the consequences of xenophobia and discrimination. Moments of progress. Conversely, moments of progress, such as the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which abolished racial quotas, demonstrate the potential for transformative change. These milestones underscore the importance of advocacy, activism, and leadership in advancing more equitable policies. Demographic shifts and the future of immigration. Demographic trends are reshaping the United States, with immigrants and their descendants projected to drive most population growth in the coming decades. These shifts have profound implications for politics, economics, and social dynamics. A younger, more diverse population immigrants contribute to the nation's demographic renewal, offsetting declining birth rates and an aging population. This younger, more diverse workforce is essential for sustaining economic growth and supporting social welfare systems. Challenges of integration. At the same time, demographic change presents challenges for social integration. Ensuring that diverse communities have equitable access to opportunities will require proactive investments in education, housing, and healthcare, as well as efforts to combat systemic discrimination. Global trends and the U.S. role. The United States does not operate in isolation. Its immigration policies are part of a broader global context. Climate change, political instability, and economic inequality are driving unprecedented migration flows, creating shared challenges that demand collective solutions. Multilateral approaches. Re-engaging with international frameworks, such as the Global Compact for Migration, could enhance the U.S.'s ability to address these challenges. By collaborating with other nations, the U.S. can share responsibility for managing migration and demonstrate leadership on the global stage. Practical solutions for a comprehensive immigration policy. To align U.S. immigration policy with economic, social, and ethical priorities, practical solutions must address the root causes of migration, streamline pathways for legal entry, and promote integration while safeguarding national security. These solutions should reflect the interconnected nature of migration and the shared responsibility it entails. 1. Address root causes through international collaboration. Investing in development, governance reforms, and climate resilience in source countries can reduce migration pressures at their origin. For example, economic development. targeted aid programs that create jobs and improve infrastructure in countries with high emigration rates, governance reforms, strengthening democratic institutions and rule of law to foster political stability, climate resilience, supporting adaptation strategies in regions vulnerable to climate-induced displacement, such as drought-prone areas in Central America and Sub-Saharan Africa. 2. Expand legal pathways for migration. Providing additional legal options for migrants helps manage flows and reduces unauthorized border crossings. Initiatives could include temporary worker programs, expanding visas for seasonal and low-skilled labor in sectors facing shortages, such as agriculture and healthcare. High-skilled immigration, streamlining processes for skilled professionals, particularly in technology and healthcare. Humanitarian pathways, increasing refugee resettlement quotas and establishing special categories for climate migrants. 3. Modernize border security and management. Effective border management should balance security with humanity. Leveraging technology can reduce the need for physical barriers and mass detention. Examples include AI-driven risk assessment, using predictive analytics to identify high-risk crossings while expediting legitimate entries. Digital asylum applications, reinstating tools like the CBP-1 app to simplify processing and reduce court backlogs. Enhanced regional cooperation, collaborating with Mexico and Central American nations to share resources and intelligence. 4. Invest in integration programs. Supporting immigrants' integration into U.S. society fosters social cohesion and maximizes their contributions. Key areas include education, expanding ESL programs and culturally responsive curricula, workforce development, offering job training and certification programs tailored to immigrant needs, healthcare access, including all residents, regardless of status, in healthcare reforms to improve public health outcomes. Advice to African leaders. Lessons from the U.S. and beyond. African nations are experiencing their own migration challenges, from rural-urban shifts to cross-border movements driven by conflict and climate change. The U.S. immigration debate offers valuable lessons for African leaders, particularly in balancing security, development, and inclusivity. 1. Strengthen regional cooperation. Initiatives like the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, can facilitate labor mobility and economic integration, reducing irregular migration and fostering shared prosperity. 2. Address root causes. Investing in infrastructure, education, and governance in underserved regions can mitigate migration pressures and promote local opportunities. 3. Adopt inclusive policies. Ensuring access to healthcare, education, and legal protections for all residents, migrants included, strengthens social cohesion and economic stability. 4. Leverage global partnerships. Collaborating with international organizations and donor nations can mobilize resources and expertise to address migration challenges effectively. Summary and key messages. This analysis highlights the profound economic, social, and ethical dimensions of immigration policy in the United States and its global implications. The key messages are: 1. The need for balanced policies. Effective immigration strategies must balance national security with economic needs and humanitarian obligations. 2. Global responsibility. Migration is a shared challenge requiring international collaboration and innovative solutions, particularly in addressing root causes. 3. The power of integration. Inclusive policies that invest in education, healthcare, and workforce development maximize the contributions of immigrants and foster stronger communities. 4. Leadership by example. Nations like the U.S. and African states must embrace their moral and ethical responsibilities in addressing migration while demonstrating global leadership. By learning from history and embracing forward-looking strategies, nations can turn migration challenges into opportunities for growth, innovation, and shared progress. Leaders worldwide, including those in Africa, are encouraged to view migration not as a problem to be solved, but as a phenomenon to be managed with empathy, foresight, and collaboration. Thank you for joining us on the Bold African Voice, BAV. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep the conversation alive. Hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest insights. Together, we can amplify Africa's voice on global issues. See you next time.